you can draw this lighthouse in Procreate. It's time for another You Can Draw This video tutorial, and this time we will be drawing this lighthouse scene. And as with all my You Can Draw This video tutorials, you will be learning by doing. I think that's the best way to get to know all the features of Procreate and learn how to use them. In this video, we will only be using the brushes that are already in Procreate. And I've made a color palette that you can use if you want to use the exact same colors I'm using in the video. So let's grab our pen and get started. First of all, the canvas is 2500 by 2500 pixels. And let's fill it with a color first. Here we have the color palette called Lighthouse, How Appropriate. And we will pick this first color right here. And you can just drop in the color by dragging your circle onto the screen. Next, be sure to make a new layer. This is a very important step because if you don't make a new layer for our next shape, then everything else will kind of fail. So be sure to click that plus now to make a new layer. And we will start using the monoline brush, which you can find under calligraphy. And we will pick this bright red color. And first thing we'll do is make kind of an oval shape. Hold your pen in place to let it snap to a perfect shape. And you can click Edit Shape and move it around a bit. You can drag these handles. Let's do something like this. And next I want to adjust this shape a little bit, and we'll do that by using the liquify tool, set to push and with distortion and momentum turned off. Zoom out a little bit, and I want to push this area in a little bit, and I want to create that shape. Well, it's kind of like that shape of a painting palette. And I'll just play around with the size of the brush a little bit. I just want a little bump or indent right here. I think this is nice. And now we can drag in the color, just dragging in that circle and filling our shape. Next thing we'll do is paint a gradient, but we'll do this on a separate layer. So let's click the plus to make a new layer, and we will set this layer to layer clipping mask. Just click the layer and select clipping mask. And now this layer is clipped to the shape that we just created. So everything that we paint on layer 3 will only show up on that shape. We are going to select the soft brush under airbrushing, and I have the opacity set to 30% and the brush size is set to 10%. And now let's pick this bright yellowish color, and we are going to lighten up that top part, because we are going to make a nice, not a sunrise, but a, do you call it sundown? It is evening and the sky is turning orange. We have these nice warm tones. And when you make this gradient, don't worry about having these harder transitions. We just want to drop in these colors. We are going to soften this up later. Let's also pick this third color in the color palette. Add some of that here. And now let's move to the Gaussian blur. You can find that under the magic wand, then select Gaussian blur. Now if you drag your finger or pen to the right, it'll start to become blurry, and that'll soften that transition in your gradient. Next thing we'll do is make the water. Let's make a new layer for that. And again, select clipping mask. So whatever we paint will only show up on our shape. For this layer, I want to create a shape first. We'll go to the selection tool right here, that S-shaped ribbon, and use the rectangle. And let's make a rectangle, and let's have it just at, well, it's about halfway of this right side. And let's drop in, well, we can drop in this 5th color of our color palette. And just click the S-shaped ribbon again to release that selection. Now we want to make a gradient on this water area. But before we can do that, we have to make sure that we don't go outside of that, well, that's selection. We don't want that horizon to become fuzzy. So we'll use alpha lock for this layer. It's kind of like clipping mask, but now we can only paint on the pixels that are already on this layer. So we can only paint on that rectangle that we just made. And we are still using the soft brush. And let's pick this 4th color in the color palette. And we'll just make some horizontal strokes over that top part of our rectangle. Even though you can't really see that it's a rectangle anymore, but this was that rectangular selection that we just made. Even use a little bit of that 3rd color. And just a little bit of that 2nd one, that darker. And we can use that 5th color to lighten it up just a little bit. And now let's go to Gaussian blur again. So we'll go to the magic wand, use Gaussian blur, and slide our pen or your finger to the right to make that soft transition. Of course, our scene also needs a sun. Let's make that now. We'll make a new layer. And again, let's use clipping mask. And we'll pick this light color right here. And let's go back to the monoline brush under calligraphy. And let's make a circle. Hold your pen in place and then hold one finger on your screen to let it snap to a perfectly round circle. You can use edit shape to move it around or to adjust it if you want. Let's place it right here and drag in the color to fill it. Now it really kind of looks like a painting palette. Let's see if you can stick your finger in there. But of course, that's not the look that we are going for. We want this to look like a sun. We have that part above the horizon and we have the reflection on the water. So what we are going to do now is make a selection of that water area. And we can do that by going to that layer on which we have that rectangle, click it, and then go for select. Now we have a selection of that water area. And now whatever you do, if you want to paint or make adjustments, it'll just happen inside of that selection. So for instance, we want to lower the opacity for that part of the sun. So let's go to opacity here in adjustments. And you can just slide to the left, lowering that opacity of that part. Let's go to around 50%. Next thing I'd like to do is go to the liquify tool. We are going to make this sun look a little bit blurry, wavy by pushing and pulling here. Let's make the brush pretty small. Let's go for, let's say, 20%. And we just want to push and pull a little bit here. giving it that blurry, watery look. So we're just pushing and pulling a little bit. Like that. And while we still have that selection active, that selection of that rectangle, we could also use a slight blur. Let's go for motion blur and slide to the right a little bit. Just slightly. We can turn off the selection now. The final thing we can do with our sun and its reflection is add a layer mask. Click that layer with the sun on it, click mask, and now we have a layer mask added to our layer. It is white right now, which means that we can see everything that's on this layer, which the mask is attached to. But once we paint with black on our layer, the parts that are black will get masked. So if we use black or gray, we will block parts of our sun. We are going to the airbrushing and use the soft brush again. And let's pick black. You can do that by double tapping in your color circle, in your wheel, double tapping, and it'll select pure black. Now you want to make sure that we are not going to block anything, any part of that top part of our sun. So we could go back to that rectangle again, click it and use select again. So we can only work on that lower part, on that reflection. Now we'll go back to that layer mask, make sure that you select that. And with our soft brush, we can block parts of that lower reflection. You can imagine that closer to that horizon, that reflection will be brighter and it'll fade away in the distance, or actually closer to the viewer. It'll be a bit faded. A bit like that. Now that our sun is in place, let's add some rocks to our scene. Again, we'll make a new layer and use clipping mask. So these rocks will only show up inside of our shape. Let's pick this color right here. It's like an eggplant color. And we will go back to calligraphy and use the monoline brush. Now let's start above the horizon here and make these wobbly shapes. Go down here and then we'll go back up again a little bit. And just make a bit of a wobbly shape. And then be sure to close your shape, go back up and close your shape right there, because if you don't and you drag in the color, the entire shape will fill. So drag in the color, and yes, our shape was closed, so we're safe. And let's make another rock on top. So we'll click the plus to make a new layer again. Click that one again and use, again, clipping mask. And this time we'll pick this darker eggplant color. And we'll make a rocky, wobbly shape again. Let's start a bit lower this time. Just make some wobbly shapes. You don't have to give it too much thought. And go back up and close your shape. And then you can drag in the color to fill it. Now we have a nice setting for our lighthouse. To make our lighthouse, I want to use the symmetry tool. And well, we don't want our lighthouse to be in the exact middle of our painting eventually. So let's just turn this off. And let's just start working on that lighthouse. Let's make a new layer on top of all the others. And we'll go to the wrench then to Canvas, turn on Drawing Guide here, and then go to Edit Drawing Guide. And here you can turn on Symmetry. That's what we need for our lighthouse. So click Done. We still have the monoline brush selected. And we will pick this red right here. A bright red for our lighthouse. Let's start off with a diagonal. Start about here. Make a diagonal line going down. And if you hold your pen in place, you will snap to a quick shape or a quick line, which is perfectly straight. And you can just drag it around until you have that shape that you are looking for. A bit like this. And then we can make another line at the bottom, closing that shape. And of course we need one at the top as well. And if you hold your finger on the screen, your line will snap to a perfectly horizontal line. Okay, I want to move this lighthouse down a little bit. Turn on magnetics so that it'll snap to the center. And let's move it down just a little bit. So we have some more room for the rest of our lighthouse. We can fill the shape with the red. And let's make a new layer on top by clicking the plus. And let's use symmetry again. So click the layer, don't forget the step, click the layer and then select Drawing Assist. Now for this layer, symmetry will also be used. And we'll make a pretty flat rectangle. Let's start about here. Make a short line up. Hold your finger on the screen to make a perfectly vertical line. And now we can make horizontal lines again to close our shape. To make a nice looking rectangle. Again, let's make a new layer. And on this layer, we will create the light of the lighthouse. But first I want to drag this layer underneath the one that we just made. And for this, we will also use Drawing Assist. So symmetry is turned on for this layer. And let's pick this color right here. We still have the monoline brush selected. And let's add our light. Let's go up a little bit. Hold your pen in place again to make a perfectly vertical line. And of course we have to make sure that we close our shape before we fill it. Doesn't really look like a lighthouse yet, right? But we'll get there, I promise. Let's go back to this layer again. We are going to make that top of the lighthouse. We'll give him a nice red cap. First we'll make a horizontal line and then we'll go to the center to make that point. And we can fill the shape by dragging in the color. Now let's get to work and make this look more like a lighthouse, okay? Let's go to that first red layer that we created, that base shape of the lighthouse first. And let's use Alpha Lock here. So you might remember that Alpha Lock, what that does is it makes sure that we can only paint on the pixels that are already on this layer. So we will only be able to paint on that red shape. Now let's pick this color right here. It's the same color as that we used for our sun. Now we'll go to the S-shape ribbon, the selection tool, and use the rectangle selection. And let's make a couple of selections, varying in height, making these different lines on our lighthouse. And one on top here. And you can fill these by dragging in the color like that. You can select the S again to turn off the selection. Let's do the same for our light. That's layer 11. Let's use alpha lock again. And let's make a rectangular selection, a bit like this. And let's drag in this very light color right here to create our light in our lighthouse. Our lighthouse could also use a door and some windows. Let's place these on a separate layer above our base shape lighthouse. So click that layer, then the plus, and we'll use the selection tool again. So let's go to the S-shaped ribbon, use the rectangle selection tool, and let's make a door right here. And we're keeping it very simple. And let's place some random windows. Because if you're making your way up in that lighthouse, of course you want to take a look outside if you're walking those stairs, I can imagine. Okay, let's grab this dark color and we'll just drag it in our selections to create this door and windows. This kind of looks like a lighthouse, doesn't it? All right, let's group these layers together by swiping to the right on all these layers that you want to select and then click group. There we have our lighthouse. Now let's turn on all the other layers again. Our scene. What I'd like to do is place this lighthouse behind our rocks, but in front of our base shape. I want it to stick out at the top. So how can we do that? Because if we place our lighthouse, let me just demonstrate. If we place it behind these rocks, they will pop up and they won't be clipped to our shape anymore. So how can we do that? Well, we can do that by using a layer mask on these shapes. I want our lighthouse to be between the lighter rocks and the darker rocks. And to make a layer mask, we'll click that base shape first, because we want these rocks to be in that base shape. We'll click it, use select, and now if we go to this dark rock layer, for instance, click it and use mask, it'll automatically mask, well, create the perfect mask so you can only see the rock inside of that shape. And we can do the same for that other rock. Just go to that layer, the selection is still active, click mask, and it'll be masked. Click the S to turn off the selection, and there we have it. Now we can easily move around our lighthouse. But let's first get rid of that line, that symmetry line. So we'll just go to the wrench, to canvas, and then turn off that drawing guide. Now we'll go to our lighthouse group, then click the move tool, and now we can move around our lighthouse. I also want to make it a little bit smaller, maybe a bit thinner. If we go to freeform, we can adjust the shape. Have it stick out just a little bit. A bit like this. As you can see, we have this little part sticking out at the bottom. We don't have to do complicated tricks for this. We can just go to that layer where it's sticking out and use the eraser, for instance, or you could use a freehand selection. We went to that S-shaped ribbon, then to freehand selection, make a rough selection of that thing sticking out, make that selection, and then if you swipe with 3 fingers, it'll clear it. Finally, for our lighthouse scene, I want to add light. It's kind of what you need with a lighthouse. And I want to add some clouds just to add, well, some stuff to our scene, making it look more interesting. So what shall we do first? Clouds, light. Let's do light first. And again, I want to have it above our shape, so it is outside of the shape. Let's first make one light beam. I'll just do that on a new layer above that group. And let's use the monoline brush again. And I'll pick this bright yellow right here. And I'll make a vertical line first, right next to our light of our, the lamp of the lighthouse. I'll hold my finger in place to make a perfectly vertical line. Now let's make a diagonal line a bit upwards here. Then go down again. I'll hold my finger again to make a perfect line and then close it like that. And let's drag in the color to fill it. And you could use the move tool right here to transform your light beam a bit. You can make it bigger. You can just move it around until you are happy with your light beam. We want that same light beam on the other side. So you can either duplicate this layer or you can swipe down with 3 fingers like this and use copy and paste to instantly copy your light beam. Now you can use flip horizontal and then you can move it to the other side. It would have been handy if I had used magnetics, but I didn't. I don't want it to touch the lamp. By the way, if you feel like you are getting a bit lost in Procreate and all the tools, then you might like my new Skillshare class, because it is perfect for beginners and I show you all the tools in Procreate. And there's also a class project in which we paint a realistic looking apple. So you might like that. If you're getting lost, if you want to learn all the basics, then that class is perfect for you. But now, back to our light beams. Of course, this is not the look we are going for. We want the light to fade into the distance. And we can do that by using a layer mask again. Let's first go to that beam on the right. We'll click it and select mask. So again, if we paint on it with black, parts of that layer will get masked. We'll go to airbrushing again and use the soft brush. Let's turn up the opacity just a little bit. I'll go to 60%. The size is at, well, let's go for 15%. And let's block this part of our light beam. And whenever we use the airbrush, you don't have to worry about it not being, about it not giving a gradual gradient, because when you're using a layer mask, you can go to Gaussian blur as well. So we'll just slide to the right a bit and we can soften that transition. I'm at around 33% right now. And we can lower the opacity of our brush to around 40 and go over it a little bit more, making sure that we don't have any weird edges there. And of course, you can also play around with the opacity of the layer itself a bit. You can just click that end and turn it down a little bit. Let's go to 70%. And let's do that for the other light beam as well. So we'll click the end for that layer too, and then go to 70% there as well. And for this layer, we will also make a layer mask. So click the layer, select mask, and again, we'll use that soft airbrush. I'll go back to 70%, and let's blur apart. Well, let's mask apart, I mean. And we'll mask a little bit more on this side. I just want the brightest beam to be on the right here. And again, we can go to Gaussian blur and blur that layer mask a little bit. I have it at 26%. And I'll just, with a 40% opacity airbrush, I'll go over it a little bit more. Finally, we'll go to those clouds. I want one of the clouds to stick out of our shape as well. I like that playful look when things stick out of the main shape. So we can make a layer. Well, let's make it on top of everything else. Just click the plus and let's pick this light color right here that we also used for the light in that lighthouse lamp. And we'll go back to calligraphy and use the monoline brush. And let's draw some playful clouds. I'll make one here. And I'll make a horizontal line first. And then add some little wobbles to create a cloudy shape. And you can just drag in the color to fill the shape. Now let's make another cloud on this side. Again, I'll make a horizontal line, so I'll hold my finger on the screen to make a perfectly horizontal line. And then create those wobbles. And if you are interested in making more realistic landscapes, dive in deeper into Procreate and all the painting techniques, then you might like my Procreate page. My Procreate page. Then you might like my Patreon page, because it is full of video tutorials, fully narrated video tutorials, ranging from beginner to intermediate to more advanced levels. But you have already advanced to the final stage of this painting, which is the finish line. You have done it. Here we have our lighthouse painting. I hope you have enjoyed creating this lighthouse scene. I sure have. And if you want to paint more, then just be sure to check out my other You Can Draw This video tutorials as well. More are coming soon, but in the meantime, you might like these two videos right here. I will see you next time.